Welcome back, everyone. Today we will be covering something different. For the last couple of weeks, we have been covering very much on the technology side of artificial intelligence. What is artificial intelligence? Various algorithms used in artificial intelligence. Some of the issues with artificial intelligence. Today we will be covering how to sell artificial intelligence. So more specifically, we'll be covering the business side of artificial intelligence. So you have an artificial intelligence solution that you have built. What next? How can you monetize it? How do you sell it? This is a very broad topic. It will take a couple of weeks to cover this, but today, very specifically, we'll be covering three questions. One is where should you incorporate AI startups? Secondly, any regulatory considerations regarding artificial intelligence? And thirdly, how do you actually sell? How do you bootstrap an enterprise sales team? Let's start with question number one, which is where should you establish an AI startup? And this is very relevant in these days because, first of all, you could be remote. Last year has shown that it is possible to have a successful company where everyone is remote. But at the same time, things may actually improve. Things are improving. So do you need a physical office? Maybe not. But when I say where should you incorporate an AI startup, it really boils down to where should that legal entity of your company be. And that relates to a lot on where your potential customers are. Where will you generate that revenue from? As a small company, you need to really focus on few geographies. That doesn't mean that you only focus on one or two geographies. You can focus on multiple geographies, but you need to start somewhere. And that's to some extent determines where you want to incorporate the company, at least initially, where you don't have a lot of revenue or you don't have revenue. You have a product. The product could be in beta or it's about to go out. You may also be looking at investors, and investors to some extent like companies that are incorporated in the area where they are. So if you're looking at investors in the US, they will like the company to be a US company. If you're looking at investors in the UK, they will like you to be a UK company. And lastly, if you're looking at enterprise AI startup where your customers are in a specific area, then that's where your revenue will be coming from. It's a good idea to really think about how will those transactions happening. Let's say that customer is ready to give you a check, and they could even be a strategic customer where they are one of your potential investors. That's where it's become important to have a legal entity in that region. Our second question is, are there any regulatory considerations when selling AI solution and anything around it? An AI solution could be multiple things. It could first of all be on the consumer side. It could also be on the enterprise side. So for the conversation today, we are more or less focusing on the enterprise side of the solution. So enterprise AI startups. But very briefly covering on the consumer side, consumer in general will have a global customer base, and the customer will be paying or not paying. But most of the time, your technology will reside in only one region. That's why it becomes much easier that you are only bound by regulatory consideration for that region. So if you're a US startup, have a solution that's similar to, let's say, YouTube or Facebook, it could have global customers. So at least when you're small, it doesn't really matter what's really happening outside. Now, on the enterprise side of things, that's where it becomes interesting because you're not looking at mass market. You're looking at few enterprise customers. And if your AI technology is sensitive For example, it could be one of the regulated technologies, or it could be a critical technologies. For example, artificial intelligence for smart grids, or AI for an aircraft or a nuclear power plant, AI for cybersecurity. These are critical technologies, and what that means is that you need to pay close attention to the export limitations of some of these technologies. Now, as a small startup, you do want to have an open mind in terms of where customers are who could potentially buy a solution. And that's where it becomes tricky on the regulations. When you're small, you don't have a lot of money to spend, let's say, on having a good legal team or even consulting a lawyer. That's where, in my opinion, less is more. So the less obstacle you could put in, the better that is. Now, if your customer is, for example, outside the US, if you already have a legal entity outside the US, it becomes much easier for you to be selling in that region. Now, if your company is in the US and you're trying to sell to enterprise customer in the UK or in Europe, that's where the trouble begins, because GDPR is strict, and you need to be in compliance when you are outside the US, in Europe or the UK, and those are the considerations that becomes important. Now, another aspect is AI in other regulated industries like healthcare. You need to think about HIPAA. If you're talking about handling financial data, you need to talk about the financial regulations. And that's where you want to start small. You want to keep things simple, and you want to be nimble. So if there's no customer who's willing to pay, why go 10 steps ahead on spending a lot of money on trying to figure all these things out? It's only when the transaction is about to happen, or when you have a product that's solid and you're ready to sell, that's where it becomes very important to slow down, talk to a lot of people, and then go to the next step. Our last topic is how to bootstrap enterprise sales team as a startup. First of all, remember that your solution is technical, especially if it's an AI solution. Now, you may think that because my solution is technical, I can only use or only require sales staff or business development staff that is technical in nature, but that's not always the case. First of all, I've seen that in a lot of cases you don't really need an explicit sales team. Your executive team is your sales team. The CEO is the top salesperson. He's selling the company. He's selling the vision of the company to other employees. He's selling the vision of the company to investors, and he's selling the vision and the product of company to potential customers. But to scale, you need other people who could replicate some of those successes, and that's where a sales team comes into picture. Usually, it's not a good idea to have engineers in front on the sales side, because they may not know exactly how to speak, and they may actually jump the ship, especially on the enterprise side. You don't want to overcome it, and also you don't want to undercome it. And that's where you want to be a little bit careful in using your engineering team or getting people who are hardcore engineers to help you with the sales. On the flip side, really good salespeople do not really need an engineering background to be great. But at the same time, they could be expensive. And that's where it's become important to be strategic about it, where you build a product in such a way that it sells itself. Use social media for as a way to guerrilla marketing. Use your own network to connect to potential customers, where you don't have to have a huge sales funnel of 1,000 customers at one end or 1,000 leads at one end. You only focus on very few. And it's only once you have set up the process or when you have one or two deals, that's when you actually go about expanding it, hiring more salespeople. So, so maybe you don't even need a sales team in the beginning. Okay, folks, that's all for today. We'll cover this topic more next week. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. My email is aditya@skive.it. That's ADITYA@skive.it. Again, we are Robometrics Machine and Skive. We are building machines that fail with use cases in healthcare and aerospace. Our product is Robometrics AGI. If you'd like to know more, please reach out. We are absolutely hiring here in the US as well in the UK. Love to hear from you. And till next week, have a great weekend. Bye.